most memorable guest at the museum?
I believe it has to be Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney, for you younger generation, was quite the actor back in the day, back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. He appeared in various movies, kind of a character actor. And he was at the gift shop buying some souvenirs, and I'll never forget after he left, I walked up to the sales clerk and I said, "Do you know who that was?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I know who that was. That was Mickey Rooney." And she said, and he wasn't very nice either, but it was just kind of funny. That was one of the people you don't expect. And I think another one was, I met Neil Armstrong and was friends with him, but I also met Harrison Schmitt, who was on Apollo 17. So I had the opportunity to meet one of the very first person to walk on the moon, and one of the almost last people who walked on the moon with Harrison Schmitt. So that was intriguing for me also.
Did you ever have anyone who didn't believe in the moon landing come to the museum?
Oh, that happened more than I liked to deal with. The worst one that I have to admit was we had a group from Detroit, Michigan come down, high school science class. No, take that back. It was high school physics class, and the science teacher, as we were touring them through the museum, he comes to me and he said, "This is all really nice, but he said, they never walked on the moon." And this come from a high school physics teacher. I was appalled. But yes, I mean, I've even done programs in the museum to try to explain to people that yes, indeed, we did walk on the moon, and there's still evidence today that can prove that we actually had been on the moon, because the astronauts left some laser reflectors. So you can take a laser beam and shoot it right towards the Apollo 11 landing site on Tranquility Base. That laser will bounce back, and it takes a little over about a second to go up and a second to go back. So there's a 2-second delay before you would receive that signal back of the laser reflection. But yes, we can prove to this day that we did walk on the moon.
What's the biggest misconception people have about Neil?
That he even though he was quiet and reserved, if you got him in a situation of one-on-one or in a small group setting, he was very chatty, had a great sense of humor. And one of the reasons that my personal feeling was that when he was out in public, he didn't want to misspeak. He wanted to make sure that everything that he told anyone was accurate. So that was the reason that he spoke the way he did. But he had a great sense of humor. I know that I watched I think it was on Channel 7 News, over the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers. And somebody asked him the question about, well, why does North Carolina always claim that they're the land of flight or the state of flight? Well, I claim it's because, that the Wright brothers went there to take their first flight from Kitty Hawk. And Neil said, yeah, he said, my response to that is that North Carolina supplied the air, Ohio supplied the brains. And that was Neil's little joke about North Carolina claiming to be first in flight.
What's one thing that people should want to know about Neil?
How smart that he was. Of all the individuals that I met at the museum over the years, Neil Armstrong was probably one of the most intelligent human beings I ever met, and he had the ability to do almost anything when it comes to the world of mechanics, aviation, and space. One of the stories he told us at one of the lunch meetings I had with him was that when they moved to Edwards Air Force Base out in California with his wife, and I'm not sure how if the children were born yet or not, but he talked about the fact he loved to work on cars. And he said that his wife wasn't pleased with him when he pulled the engine out of an old Chevy or whatever, and he decided he wanted to give it more horsepower, so he just brought it in the house, set it in the living room, put it on a block, and sat there and disassembled it and put it back together again. And he said she wasn't just too happy with me when I did that. So I mean, when you hear the stories about all the things that he loved farming, coming from Auglaize County, loving the idea that and he had a farm when he lived in Lebanon, Ohio, where he raised some animals, is my understanding. So he was quite down to earth, but a lot of people never saw that, I don't think. He was down to earth and extremely intelligent.
Could you tell us more about Neil's parents and how they felt about his work?
Neil's mother and father were quite religious. I remember that from church, and they were extremely proud of the fact that Neil Armstrong, but there was also that concern because, I think Neil later said that he figured there was only a 50-50 chance of them making it through the moon landing. So, as any parent would be, especially growing up in a small community here in Wapakoneta and all the other places they had moved around. They were quite proud, but also there was that concern all the time about, for his well-being, because this had to be one of the most dangerous missions, because men had never been to the moon before that was ever out there.
What is your first memory of the church with Neil?
When I was, like I said, probably 5 or 6 years old, and going to church. And I also remember around that time period that my mother was sick. She had pneumonia and went to the hospital. And I'll never forget that Viola came over with some tomato soup. Now, why I remember that, I don't know, because I was probably like 4 or 5 years old. I was really little. But I remember her coming to the door and brought some soup over for my sister and I when we were little, because my dad was working and my mother was in the hospital. So she was part of the church committee, I'm sure, that did those things. But she stopped over at that time. That's one of my earliest memories.
Can you tell us about the St. Paul prayer services for Neil?
Yes, during both of Neil's missions, Gemini 8 and of course the Apollo 11 moon mission, St. Paul's United Church of Christ, because that was the church that Neil considered to be his hometown church, had a prayer vigil during that time period. And you could come into the church during various times, and they offered prayers through the entire mission. The whole time that Neil was on his missions, there was prayer that was available, prayer service for the congregation, really anybody if they wanted to stop in during the moon landing.
Is there anything that you would like to clarify on or add? Tell us anything we want to know?
No, I believe the thing I always try to talk about is the fact that there's a lot of misinformation out there. You can be on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever. There's so much misinformation about the moon landing, and it's still out there. People still saying, they'll pop up on some of the social media. They'll show a picture of, I saw one the other day that showed one of the moon suit that's in the Smithsonian now, and the shoe is quite smooth on the bottom. So there was some Yahoo on there who claimed, well, that proves it, because when you see the footprint on the moon, you can see that they had, boots on that left footprints, and they don't match up with the footprints. Well, the thing is the fact that those boots that they wore, they covered over the top of the regular shoe. They took those off when they were inside the spacecraft, but when they were on the lunar surface, they had this overshoe that went there, that's what left the footprints. But this guy thought for sure, well, that was a good explanation. And there's the other one also showing the flag flying, and they claim, well, the flag is flying on the moon. When you look at the pictures, there's no wind. Well, on the flag itself, on the standard, on the rod, there was a rod that came out that allowed the flag to hang straight down, so it looked like it was flying when it really wasn't. And when they unfurled it, it didn't unfurl all the way because it had been wrinkled up so much and being folded, so it kind of looked like it was waving in the wind, but it wasn't. But we truly did go to the moon, and if anybody would have any questions about that, feel free to call me. I can explain in great detail about why and how we got to the moon.
Thank you very much for this interview. It was very interesting.
You're more than welcome.